yes, what happened was that when I was close to 3 years old, I drowned. So by then we used to, I grew up in Bogota, Colombia, and my parents will leave us at the care of a maid. And this lady didn't pay attention to us or anything when my parents were not there. And then one morning, very early, my parents left, and my oldest sister, she was close to 4. Mia was just close to 3. We had another little sister, she was 1. But realizing that the lady was not paying attention, we already knew that she would just go and do her thing. We're like, let's go play in the patio. And then we went to the patio, but the problem in this patio that there was a tank, and this tank was a huge tank that held about like 900 gallons of water. And this tank was, the purpose was to collect water for hand washing clothes. We didn't have a washing machine back then. So when my sister and I went to the patio, we found a ball, and we're like, let's play cash across the tank. And we climbed the tank, and I mean, like, who's thinking about any danger? Is just, let's have fun. And then he sat on the flat surface where you scrub the clothes. So she was kind of safer there. And I went on the other side, and I was like, this was like a thin edge. So I just bended my knees, and I was like being there, like pretty much any movement and I could fall, but I didn't think about any of that, just having fun. And then my sister threw the ball, and she didn't apply enough force, and the ball fell on the surface of the water. It was floating. And then I leaned forward, and I thought, oh, I can grab it. And the moment I touched it, it rolled, and I fell in the tank. And the first feeling that I had when falling in this tank was the sense of the water being frigid cold, because Bogota's high up in the Andes. The temperature maybe was between 30, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and this water was so cold. So it was the sense of like this chill. And after that was the sense of like, why I cannot breathe. What is going on? I have never been in a pool. We didn't have a bathtub. So at 3 years old, I did not have any idea that if your head is underwater, you drown. And I'm like, why I cannot breathe? And I enter into the terror. And when I am like, how can I escape from this tank? Just imagine that all these thoughts in the head, just in that moment of horror. And just like that, I went from that horror, and it was like, now there was peace and calmness and serenity, and just like, oh, it just felt incredibly good. And it was like that sense I didn't have to escape from the tank. I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. There was no need to breathe anymore. It was like, I didn't know what was happening, but it was just like, this is incredibly good. And then right there, when I am in that, and I always like to mention the contrast I experienced, because that goes to people asking always, how can you remember these? Mm-hmm. And I said, because there was a lot of contrast in the experience. First thing, drowning, like that was a horrendous trauma right there. And after that, it was that the moment I'm drowning, I could hear my heart, and it was beating in my head like a drum, like boom, 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 boom. And it came the silence. And I also live in a very noisy house and everything. So it was that sense of like, this peace. And for the rest of my life, I craved that silence. And I will go into closets, chapels, I will hide under the bed. I just wanted it so bad. And the other contrast I experienced was that this tank was made of cement. It was very dark area. So the last thing I saw with my eyes open was the darkness of the space. And right there, it was light. When I went into that state of peace, serenity, calmness, now there was light. And this light came from below, and it was able to illuminate the whole watery surrounding. And when the light is there, I'm just like, oh, no, there is light. And from there, I started to see bubbles. And the bubbles were surrounded by light. And then I started to chase the bubbles. And it was like when chasing the bubbles that I turned around. And it's when I saw a body suspended in the water. And this was like this incredible moment because I didn't feel afraid. It was even the sense that I wasn't not even like shocked, surprised. It was like, oh, that's my body. And it was that sense that this is normal. Like, oh, this is normal. And then I looked at the body. And at that moment, this comes the other contrast. I was born as a very sick child. And I spent almost 3 years of my life feeling unwell. I didn't even know how it was to feel well. Didn't know any other feeling. And now that I was feeling absolutely amazingly well, imagine I look at the body and I'm like, I'm not going back there. And I just turned around and I left the body behind. And when I turned around, I started to see bubbles. Oh, no bubbles, flowers that were blooming from nowhere. So first was the bubbles, now the flowers, and the flowers were like blooming. And it was like a majestic thing. I'm like, oh. And then the sense of dimension disappeared because suddenly I was picked by the flowers. And now being carried, I'm just like, I'm completely relaxed. Like when you're just there, like, oh, we just lying there, like, oh, this is so good. Like I always put the analogy that is like going back to the womb. So when you don't have to do anything, you're just being done. And I was just resting there in that joy and peace and happiness when, like that, in a blast, I appear in the maid's room. And I'm floating above. And I'm looking at her from above. And I'm like, oh, that's Maria. And Maria was completely unaware of what is happening. She's listening to soap operas in the radio. And I can even remember the soap opera she was listening. And then since nothing happened, in like another plane like that, I appear in my mom's path. My mom didn't have a car. She, like I said, she left that morning and she's walking. And she's close to her bus stop. And I think crossing that whole neighborhood, it took about 10 minutes to get to her bus. And then she's about to arrive when I'm now floating above her. And this is the part, like I always say, like I said to Abigail, this is the part that shocks everybody and even validates the experience, because it's when I saw my mom, and the moment I said, oh, that's mommy, she stopped. And she just didn't hesitate. She didn't give another step. She stopped and she knew that something was happening at home with one of her daughters. And she turned around. And this is the other thing. I not always share so much background story, but is my mom. She just had got a new job. And of course, when you get this new job, you don't want to not show up or to be late. So it's like, this will pull you harder than anything. But my mom had this amazing intuition and she always listened to that. And the moment she felt that, it didn't matter job, it didn't matter nothing, she turned around and she started to run. And I looked at her, I'm like, oh, why she's running? And then the moment I'm looking at her, because I turned around because she was running, I fixed my point of view, and like at the end of the road, I saw a dog. And I love animals. And the moment I felt the desire to be with the dog, I am with the dog. I'm like, whoa. Then I changed my view and I see a park. And the moment I feel the desire to be in the park, I am in the park. And it was like, wow, what is happening? So in that moment, I started to play this game of going places. It was that I was having just so much fun. And when I'm playing this game, again, like in another flash like that, I appear in a realm, and it was made of pure, bright, intense, shiny light. And when I am there, is that sense of like, it was the first time in the almost 3 years of my life that I felt I am at home. It was like, oh, finally home. And although I didn't see anybody, it was the sense of being welcome, of, you know, when you're home, is that sense of familiarity. And then it's when I had the realization, although I had seen my body, up to that point, I didn't have that clarity that realization that was not who I was. And at that moment, it's like, I am not that. And it's when I realized myself as a being of light. And then it's the sense that it was kind of like dissolving with the whole. And this but at that point, I was still having a sense of self. But this even like dissolve into what I call the sense, so some call it non-self, some call it, I don't know, the emptiness, I call it nothingness. For me, it was that the sense of nothingness, because it's nothing I knew, nothing. It's like, I give the analogy of like a little box in the middle of a stadium. And it's like you thought you were that, and you were the content in this box, and suddenly the box disappeared and you realize, oh, I am the totality of this stadium. And then I think having words to describe this is impossible. I think we just have to experience it. But I think the only words I could use, and I always use, is just absolute presence and pure consciousness. Because in reality, there's a space of nothing. What we know here was very limited. So it was no color I could define, not movement I could define, nothing I could really define with words. So it was just, imagine trying to describe things that you have never experienced, or people around you have experienced in their human form. So it's like, I cannot describe you a color you never have seen. Mm-hmm. It's difficult. So it's something like that. And when I'm in this state of being, just dissolve into this wholeness, my mom finally arrived home. And this is the other incredible thing. We live in a very big house, but my mom knew exactly where to go. And she went to the back of the house, and there I was in the tank, and my oldest sister was still there. And people asked me why she didn't go call the maid, and because we didn't supposed to be there in the patio. And then, of course, it was the fear of reprisal, like, oh, she's going to get mad at us. So she was there trying to get me out. And then when my mom arrived to the patio, she looked at her and she's like, Ingrid is there and I cannot get her. And my mom, this is another incredible thing, all the synchronicities and how things are so perfect. My mom worked with children, and she was trained CPR for children. So she knew what to do. So when she got me out of the tank, she said that I was like a raggedy doll. No pulse, nothing. She said I was pale, that it was not breathing. And she started to do all the, she knew to revive me. And at that point, like I said, I was completely detached from this reality, from this body, from thinking or knowing I'm like, I am a being of light in the state of complete wholeness. And then is when I felt that I had jumped from the tallest building in the world. And there's nothing I could do to stop that. I was like, no. And it's when I knew that I was back in the body, because all the feelings of pain and discomfort and the lack of the sense of freedom, like now I am back in that little box in the middle of the stadium. And then I was very, very, very angry after that. It was, I didn't want to be here. So that's the experience with the near death. And then this experience just opened the doors for me to have other, what we call spiritual or mystical experiences for the rest of my life. So that's the other thing. When people ask me, how can I remember? I said, how can I forget? One, the experience offers so much contrast, and two, it never ended, because after that I kept having out-of-body experiences. Then after that I started to communicate with beings of light, and I also came with awareness and abilities I didn't have before. So when I look at my parents, I knew they're not just my biological parents. I had experienced oneness, so I felt them as my equal. And I felt other people like that. So I became very rebellious, because it was like, why do I have to do what you're asking me? And I refused to be conditioned. And in school was hard, and everywhere was hard. And even later in my life, when I asked why my experience happened when I was so young, the answer I got is because you were old enough to remember, but young enough not to be conditioned yet. So it was incredible, because I didn't have the conditioning to think or to know even about death, or there was any knowledge of near deaths or nothing. And the other thing that validated the experience and everything that was happening to me is that right after, I'm just mentioning, I'm about to be 3 years old, and now after the experience, now I can read, I can write, I can resolve mathematical problems, I can put together complex puzzles, I can paint. So, and that continue evolving like more and more. So later in school and all that, when I was learning things, I'll be bored, and it was hard, because to me it's like, it was the sense I don't need to learn any of these. I'm just remembering. And I was always ahead of the other children. And in Colombia, there was no programs for people like me. So the teachers didn't even know what to do. So it incredibly, all these gifts at the same time became burdens, because nobody knew what to do with a person like me. So that was pretty hard. But thankfully, the first person that validated me and my experiences and what was happening was my mom. Because when I went to school, there was a moment in my life when I started to see the beings of light, that when I was 3, they appeared. First, they appeared when I went to sleep. And then after that, they started to appear when I was awake. And the first one that I was able to connect with when I was doing out-of-body experiences was golden being of light. It was a being shining in gold, and it was just a shining light, but it shaped itself into a human form. And it touched me, and that's the reason I called him beings of light, because I said to him, you are a being of light. And then at that experience, I woke up And then later, and from the moment I started to see these beings of light and realize they're like us, I started to heal, because up to that point I refused to eat. I reached the point where I didn't even want to be touched by people. It was really difficult. And then, but the other thing is that later, how to explain to you, I wanted to sleep all the time because I'm seeing these beings of light, but I needed balance. So at some point I started to also see them here in the physical reality, this physical realm. And it was a day I'm taking a shower, and then I saw a blue shining light appear in the bathroom. And you're like, whoa, now the beings of light are here. And it was that sense of being home again, and feeling that I could interact with others, that it was okay to eat, that it was okay to be here. And it's when later in life, and it's when I said to people, I learned that home is not a place, it's a state of being. Because first I just thought I had to go somewhere, that I had to go there. And when they started to appear here, it's like, and I started to feel really well, it's like, oh, I get it, I don't have to go anywhere. I just have to feel that sense of being home within myself. Mm-hmm. And then from there is like, I reject my name. I didn't have any connection with my persona. It was, incredibly, lately, I met a person, other people that have had incredible near-death experiences. And one of them, she said that when she didn't believe that in this thing that people talk about, oneness of dissolving with the whole, or she didn't believe that, but we didn't meet before. And then when I told her my story, because she didn't experience it, she always kept a sense of individuality during her whole experience. For me, I lost it. So when I came back here, I didn't have sense of connection with my persona, with my name. I lost that. And I even look at other people and I used to say, what is happening to all these people? And it was like, they don't know anything. I couldn't relate with other children. It was very hard. And then it was that sense of completely losing the sense of connection with this persona, with this body, with everything. So when people will call my name, I didn't want to answer to it. And I would look at myself in the mirror and cry and tell my mom, you don't understand, this is not me. This is not my name. And it was a time when I threw a tantrum like that. They were calling me to dinner and I'm like, don't want to go. I was aggravated. So the lady came, Ingrid, we're calling you for dinner. And I'm like, don't call me like that. That's not my name. And then when she said to me, then how should we call you? What is your name? And just all aggravated. And I said, I don't need a name. I don't need one. And then that's the first time I started to communicate, to hear the beings of light. Up to that point, I could feel them, even smell them. Okay. Just like this most incredible perfume. And then now is when I heard that this very loving voice that said to me, it's going to take time for them to understand that names are not needed in the realm of the light. I was like, oh. And they said, and they just brought to my clarity, like I already knew. Like, and it's, for me, it was so important because it was the sense like, oh, I know now why I don't need a name. And then, yeah, for me, it was a very, very important moment. And they also say to me that the things that were happening to me and that what was going to happen was all for me to someday just share. So this is not for you to keep, but the right moment will come. I didn't think it was going to be like 40 years later. But yeah, all this just made it very hard because I was a very different person from the rest. nobody had this clarity. But when I went to school and I was in kindergarten, the beings of life told me not to tell anybody because they were not going to understand. And then in the school, they told me not to tell, but they didn't tell me not to paint. And I started to paint beings of light everywhere. And it's when the teacher came and she said, oh, are these the stars? Are these the sun? What the heck is this? Because I'm painting these everywhere. And I'm like, no, these are my friends, the beings of light. And it's when I realized that I kind of shouldn't say this stuff like this, because she thought I had imaginary friends. And she called my parents. And when my mom came, we also discovered, because of all the drawings I was doing, that I could also see auras. So it's like, and at that moment, it's like I tell my mom, I wanted someone to believe me so badly that I told my mom, Mom, these are the colors that we wear, and these are my friends, the beings of light. And it's when my mom just made me these big mom eyes, like, like, be quiet. And then I'm like, and the teacher, as she told the teacher, this is just a phase. Everything is going to be okay. And then we left, and I was so sad. And it was on the way home when my mom told me that she believed me. And I was like, and then it's when she confessed to me that she believed me because she also could see things that nobody could. And this when she revealed to me that she could see spirits. So I didn't know what spirits were. So, but I had somebody that validate, and it was in that moment, imagine, of connection. And later, at the age of 6, I started to see what people call spirits, and I didn't know at the beginning that there's nothing different. But when I saw the spirits, it was one of the most fearful moments of my life. And then I went to my mom and I told her that the beings of light and the spirits were not the same. And my mom didn't know, she thought, didn't know difference. So it's when my mom asked me to explain what I was seeing. And when I explained, she started to cry and she said, I think you see angels. And the reason why we didn't know is because it's when I told my mom, I don't think they're angels because they don't have wings. See, I never told her I see beings with wings. So she thought we were seeing the same thing. So now my mom understood, and she's like, I think they're angels. And I just was confused. So I went and I asked the beings of light. And I asked 2 things. First, I said, what is with these dark spirits? I call them dark spirits because they cause me fear. Mm-hmm. And then it's when I was expecting to hear, yeah, you're different. And I got the most amazing answer, because it's when they said to me, that we call spirits, you, us, in essence, we're all the same. The difference is the level of awareness that you have about who you truly are. And then it's when I said, And I said, my mom called you angels. Is that what you are? And they gave me, the most amazing answer. They say, we are what you want us to be. You can call us whatever you want. That's when I understood, and later with more clarity, that the universe presents to us in the way that we can understand it at the moment, or that is for our own growth of evolution. It's just for each one of us. Is our own personal experience. So that was just, yeah, that was that. And then after that, thankfully, the next person that was there was my grandmother, and she brought me to the path of spirituality. And then I started to meditate at the age of 8. read spiritual books. By the age of 9, I was reading. So while other children are playing and having fun, I'm reading books of self-realization, discernment, the Bhagavad Gita, and I wanted to be enlightened. Other kids wanted dolls and stuff, and I wanted to be enlightened. So of course I wasn't like anybody else, so it was very hard to fit in. It was very hard to belong. So that created those kind of sufferings of feeling different. So yeah, growing up like that, it had very beautiful things, but it had very hard things too. So like by the age of 12, I told my grandmother that I wanted to die. And then she was very nervous. So she took me to a place, because I already have had my problems with church. Because when I was 9, I was so in love with God, so deeply in love with God, that I wanted to become a nun, because I was in a Catholic school. I didn't know different. But when I went to the church and I kept hearing this fear of God, I'm like, what? Why is just talk about fearing God? It was very contradicting in my mind. Mm-hmm. And when I went to the priest in our community and I said, that very fact that you fear God is separating you from God. Don't you get it? And I said, God is love. There's nothing to fear. Oh, he said, you're just but a child. You don't know anything. Those are the words of the devil. Mm. And they put me to pray and all that. So by then I was like imagine, I didn't fit, I didn't belong. Even in my church, at a school, they put me in a corner because they didn't know how to deal with somebody with the level of, let's call it intelligence, or the way I was capturing things. And now in my church also, so it just by 12, I just wanted to die. And then my grandma took me to this Buddhist temple, which in Colombia was unheard, because the majority of, at the time, it was 98% of the population was Catholic. But my grandma, she grew up as a Catholic, but she was always very rebellious, and she was always like, oh, there's more, and she wanted to know more, study more. And she joined an order called the Rosicrucian Order, and she started to learn Buddhism and Hinduism and everything else. And then she learned about this little Buddhist temple, and she took me there. And it was just perfect. And it was this space where I just felt like, again, the sense of home happened. And I love the smell of incense. And I just have this sense, I love it so much because it was nothing that was trying to condition me, or that I had identified, or like a school, like religion, nothing. It was just, to me, was this magic place. And then this monk taught me a breathing meditation technique. And then at the end of the whole thing, I approached him and I said, my grandma's a busy woman. I don't think we can come back to the temple. And it's when he said to me, you never have to come back to the temple. And I said, why no? And he said, because you already have a temple. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you are the temple. So wherever you are, you can bring this breathing meditation with you. And that was, again, like one of those moments where like the light shone for me, like now I walk in life thinking and realizing I have this temple. So that was just, that was incredible. And it comes with other experiences of like, I started to have visions since I was 4 years old, and I started to have access to past lives experiences when I was 17, and started to communicate with animals when I was about 8. and I started to hear the plants talking or making sound when I was about 15. So it was just that deep, deep, deep connection, and my grandma teaching me to meditate and maintaining that connection and reading and all that, kept that channel pure and open. And this is beautiful, because I always say, and in all my presentations and to people, I always used to say, it's like the door for me never closed. It's like the door never closed. Until the beings of light a couple of years ago, I guess, probably scratching their head like, Ingrid, of course the door never closed, because there is no door. Well, consciousness, source, the kingdom of heaven, God is here for everybody, always. We're the ones, due to conditioning, to beliefs, to, I don't know, culture, religion, family, everything, our own experiences, fear, we create doors, until, or layers, until we just completely get trapped in that little corner and we forget who we are, we disconnect. And this whole, what you guys doing, what we all are doing, is reminding people to spill these layers and go back to the light that we are, to remember who we are. So this is kind of like the story which I talk.
So will you just tell Gillian what you ended up doing, would you, just quickly?
With my
career, because it was, yeah.
So I think that everything is just perfect. I needed to ground. So life guided me there. And life guided me there, even with the knowing what I was going to do or pick for career since I was a little child. So when I was 4 years old, my parents brought me, I was born in the mountains. So you would think there's no connection there. And when my parents brought me to see the ocean when I was 4, it was like, I was mesmerized. And I turned and I would have this thing, because when I have visions, it's like I am taken. It's like when you stare and you're taken. And then my mom called me like, Ingrid, what is happening? I'm like, I turned to her and I say, someday I'm going to know what is there. But it was this clarity, I'm going to know. And then when I was 5, and this is something my dad always say to everybody, how she could know if nobody ever talked to her about these things. I went to him and I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a marine scientist. Mm-hmm. And then I pursued that. And it was like, after that, it was everything. I wanted books and I wanted to know everything about the ocean. And then that's the career I picked. And then when I graduated from school, that's what I went to do. But that's what I also needed, because I was, imagine with all the spiritual life I was having, it's like I was floating in a cloud and I needed to ground. So I had to pick a career. I had to pick a path that also brought me to do the grounding. So picking that was very important. And incredibly, at 19 years old, I'm already in college. I had another experience where I, again, in a bus, in a state of awareness, I dissolved into the state of, again, this consciousness, like during my near death. And when I came back, it was that clarity. I told the beings of light, wait a minute, I cannot keep doing this. I want to be like everybody else. And later in my life, I incredibly not long ago, I told the beings of light that when I disconnected and I needed the grounding at 19 years old, I asked the beings of light to just please let me just be. And they're like, okay. And that connection, it's like if you have a radio and you change your dial, But they were always there, just I changed the frequency. But to change the frequency, I will tell you what happened, because that's just incredible. But when I had that experience, I asked them, I just want to go, and that was given. And I could not have also grounded and lower my vibrational frequency if I would have kept going out with the spiritual people and the spiritual meetings and everything. So what happened at that moment is that the person I met, and it was even strange because I fell for this guy hard. And everything I pictured in my mind about the guy I will date would have been somebody, of course, super spiritual with all these gifts and all that. No, he was a person that was very grounded, that just was only thinking about partying, going out, had a death metal band, and it was just like grounded 100%. So I needed all this stuff to just ground me. But at that age, when I disconnected from the beings of light, is when I received the message that in 20 years I will understand. Then I didn't know really what that meant at that moment, and I was like, 20 years, oh my god, like whatever. And then at that point, this is the part where I always say that for 19 years, I give the analogy, I have been in a room with the lights on. I had other kinds of suffering, more related with the sense of not belonging. And I was going to mention this and I forgot. Not long ago, I said the words like, I wanted to be normal. And it's when the being so light said to me, no, you didn't want to be normal. You wanted to belong. Belonging is human. We have to belong to be able to exist here. So at that moment, I disconnected. I said to people, it's like for the first 19 years, I was in a room with the lights on. So you're in this room and you have the lights on, you don't trip with the furniture. You know where everything is at. But what happened when you turn the lights off? Now all the furniture become obstacles. And that's what happened right there to me. And that's what most of us as humans go in life, tripping with everything. And then it's when other kinds of sufferings started to happen. Before it was the suffering of not belonging, now was other huge sufferings. And now the feeling that I was not, what is one of the big sufferings of humans? Fear, the sense of that we're not abundant, the sense of that we're limited, the sense that we cannot do it, that we're not good enough, all that stuff. And then for 20 years, I went through huge sufferings, things that abusive people, I almost was raped and murdered. I had typhoid fever. I had a pregnancy that almost took my life. I had car accidents. I mean, just name it. Like my dad says that I am like the cat with the 7 lives. He said, you have 9, because it's like many things happening. And it's like, I fell into deep depression. Oh, it was a lot happened during those 20 years. And I didn't know that 20 years had passed. I wasn't counting, I forgot all about it. But it's when 20 years actually passed and I had what I call my big awakening. And it all started with a friend inviting me to meet the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, India. And I spent 1 week with the Dalai Lama receiving his teachings. And it's when it just hit me hard. I mean, I have become very successful with my career. When I was 12 years old, I had a vision. I was in Colombia. Imagine just this I would just think third world country, a girl, middle class, third world country. I mean, like really, when I had the vision that I was going to work for NASA, I was like, like how? And yeah, that's what I ended doing. Like really successful career. I work with huge projects, bringing awareness. I in Colombia work with a project for the mangrove ecosystems, and it was a project creating consciousness, how to use the resources in a manageable way. It wasn't prohibiting people to use it. It was teaching people to belong, to realize that they were nature. And the project was so successful that the people started to grow the mangroves. And we were able to witness huge areas of mangroves being restored. So the project was incredible. And then I kept working with projects like that. Then I became an expert in climate change. And then I did my PhD in marine sciences with emphasis in oceanography. And then I was hired by NASA. And I kept working with climate change and creating consciousness about that. Then I was hired by the US Navy, and I started to represent the US Navy all over South America. So I was very, very successful. I created, because I was still having, of course, that connection, I created projects that were incredible, projects that nobody thought of done before. So I was, like I said, very successful, but at the same time, I became very depressed because it was the realization, yeah, now in the outer, I had this success, I had this money, I had this stuff, but in the inner, I became more and more empty, more and more disconnected. And when I fell into that deep, deep depression after meeting the Dalai Lama, spending 1 week with him, it was that sense of like, I have disconnected from my truth. And it was when it just hit me really, really hard. And then I thought about committing suicide. And then the night that I thought about doing it, it was that sense of just wait one more day and see what happened. And then, but at that moment, it was also my prayer. I had stopped meditating and praying for a while, and I didn't feel deserving because many things happened. And then it was that call. My prayer wasn't to God to change my reality. My prayer was to guide me to understand it. So God, help me see because I have become blinded. Help me see because I cannot see. Help me understand, bring clarity to my mind. And that was my prayer. And then the next morning I woke up with the clarity, go look for help. Because at that moment I just thought, I don't need any help. I don't need anybody. And then I was guided to meet a psychologist. And in the same day, 3 different sources named me the same psychology. And I have written his name on a paper. I'm like, this is definitely a sign. And then I went to meet the guy, and he was very spiritual. And he started to just guide me. And it's when he asked me to write a list of my sufferings. I already been talking to him for a while. And then when I wrote this list and I showed it to him, he said, I've never met anybody in my 37 years of career that have suffered this much and is mentally stable. And I'm just like, what? I'm like, what? And then it's when this question that, of course, we humans, and I've been asking myself all my life, imagine being so different, being so all of it. I'm like, why me? Why me? I was just so distraught. Why me? And he gave me the answer that turn the light on, that resolved the puzzle. And it was the most simple question, the most simple answer. When I said, why me? He said, why not? And then it's when I realized that he had been listening, been talking to him like for about a year, because he started to say, look, Ingrid, thanks to this, you have done this, and thanks to this, you have done that, and thanks to this, and that. And he started to connect for me all these, and I'm like, oh. And when I just had that realization, I started to, when I discovered that there was purpose behind absolutely everything. And I discovered what is called universal goodness. And then I would say that 3 miracles happened that day. First miracle was the realization that nothing ever happened to me. It happened for me.
Mm.
The next miracle was the realization that I was standing or sitting in this chair talking to this doctor, and that was the only truth. The rest was in my head, and I had the power to do whatever I wanted with it. So that gave me the sense of inner power. And the last miracle was forgiveness. It was the realization of what true forgiveness was. And it was the knowing that if there's nothing that is ever done to me than for me, then there's nothing to forget. There's nothing to forgive. Then at that moment is when I realized absolutely everything is forgiven, or there's nothing to forgive. Because everything was for my own good. Then I entered in the state of gratitude. And when I enter in that state of gratitude is the higher vibration, the highest vibrational frequency there is. So when I enter in the state of pure gratitude, I got completely elevated again, and it like the dial turned on again, and my connection with the beings of light restored everything. I just was again. And I was now driving my car, and that's when I say I had my big awakening, is when at that moment is I had that sense that, again, that pure bathing in pure consciousness, in presence. And is when I started to feel that absolutely everything, the wheel, the windshield, the car, every pore of my body, absolutely everything was God. Source, presence, the creator, whatever you want to call it. There was nothing that wasn't it. And then from there, these other things happen. The idea of the book came, and now I was introduced to somebody in my job that was very spiritual, to incredibly at the NASA base. And it's when the being so light said, now you can tell her everything. And from sharing with her and everything, then now I was able to start coming out of the spiritual closet and sharing everything.
Her book, don't I? You gave me a copy of it.
Not Ingrid.
Okay. I'll
Not
get a hold.
Ingrid.
I will get a
Not
hold of your book.
Ingrid, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you. Yes. And with the book, it was that sense of like writing the book. I thought I was being very egotistic, because I'm like, oh God, I'm writing an autobiography. And it's when the beings like made it clear for me, this is nothing to do with you and everything you can do for others. And at the beginning, people ask me, you're writing a bestseller, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm writing nothing. Just this book can help one person. I'm already a bestseller. And then when I started to receive emails, your book saved my life. I'm like, I'm done.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, the story.